The document that changed everything was hidden in plain sight. Intelligence Chief Amina Khanate places a folder marked classified on Traoré's desk. The presidential office in Ouagadougou is dimly lit, the weight of evening pressing against the windows. Outside, the city sleeps peacefully, unaware that their president is about to discover the most devastating betrayal of his life. "Sir, you need to see this immediately," Khanate says, her usually steady voice carrying an unusual tremor. She's been Burkina Faso's intelligence chief for 5 years, and Traoré has never seen her look so disturbed. Inside the folder are bank statements, coded messages, and photographs spanning 3 years, all connected to one person, Marcel Dubois, Traoré's closest friend and senior advisor. The man who sits in every cabinet meeting, who knows every state secret, who has been like a brother since their days at the military academy. The money trail leads directly to DGSE headquarters in Paris. Khanate continues, spreading the documents across the mahogany desk. "Every major decision we've made, every strategic plan, Marcel knew about it first." Traoré's face remains calm, but his eyes betray the storm brewing inside. He picks up a bank statement dated 3 months ago, the same week they had decided to nationalize the gold mines. The deposit, €50,000. "How long have you known?" Traoré asks quietly. "We've been investigating for 6 weeks. We had to be absolutely certain before bringing this to you." The silence that follows is deafening. In it, Traoré can hear the echo of conversations, the memory of late-night strategy sessions where Marcel would offer insights that seemed brilliant at the time. Now, every suggestion takes on a sinister new meaning. 15 years earlier, at the West African Military Academy in Senegal, 2 young cadets made a promise that would bind their fates together, though neither could imagine how tragically that promise would be broken. Ibrahim Traoré, 20 years old and burning with revolutionary fire, stood with his roommate Marcel Dubois under the vast African sky. They had just completed their final examination, graduating with honors that would launch their military careers. "Look at those stars, Ibrahim," Marcel said, his French accent carrying the authority of generations of colonial administrators, though he claimed to reject that legacy. "Each one represents a village, a town, a city across this continent that deserves better than what the old powers have given them. And we're going to give it to them," young Ibrahim replied, his conviction absolute. "No more puppet governments. No more resource extraction that enriches Paris while African children starve. We'll build something new." Marcel clasped his friend's shoulder. "Brothers in revolution, brothers in purpose. Whatever happens, we stand together." They performed a traditional ceremony they had learned from Malian cadets, mixing their blood and swearing an oath under the ancestors' watch. Neither spoke French that night. They communicated in Bambara, the language of resistance. That memory feels like poison now as Traoré reviews the intelligence file. Every shared secret, every moment of trust had been calculated. Marcel hadn't been his brother in revolution, he had been his surveillance officer. "Show me everything," Traoré commands, his voice deadly quiet. Khanate activates her laptop, displaying a detailed timeline. The recruitment appears to have happened during Marcel's supposed vacation to France 3 years ago. DGSE approached him through his cousin, who works for the Foreign Ministry. The screen shows financial records, monthly payments of €5,000, with bonuses for particularly valuable intelligence. A deposit of €20,000 after Marcel provided detailed plans for Burkina Faso's withdrawal from the CFA franc. Another €30,000 when he shared the strategy for expelling French military bases. Here's what makes this especially damaging. Khanate clicks to a new document. Marcel wasn't just reporting our plans, he was actively influencing them. "Look at this." She displays intercepted communications between Marcel and his handler, codename Libreville. Marcel, new mining legislation being drafted. Recommend triggering labor strikes in Sector 7 to delay implementation. Libreville, approved. Resources will be available. Continue monitoring President's family security protocols. Marcel, understood. Ibrahim trusts me completely. I've suggested he increase Chinese partnerships to provoke American response, creating instability as requested. Libreville, excellent work. Bonus authorized. How is his emotional state? Marcel, still grieving his father's death in the mines. I've been positioning myself as his confidant during vulnerable moments. Maximum leverage achieved. Traoré's hands clench into fists. Marcel had been there during the darkest period of his life, when memories of his father's death in the French-owned gold mines had nearly broken him. The comfort, the understanding, the shared pain, all of it had been performance. "There's more," Connate says softly. "We believe Marcel has been drugging you." The room spins slightly. "What?" "Low-level sedatives in your coffee during crucial meetings. Not enough to incapacitate, but enough to slow your reaction time, make you more suggestible. We found traces in samples from your office. 3 years. 3 years of manipulation, of carefully orchestrated betrayal." Traoré thinks of every major decision, wondering how many had been influenced by chemical assistance and psychological manipulation. "Where is he now?" Traoré asks. "In his quarters. He has no idea we know. Sir, we need to decide how to proceed. If we arrest him immediately, we lose the opportunity to feed disinformation back to Paris. But if we wait, he's scheduled to leave for a family visit to France next week." Traoré finishes. "He's planned his extraction." Connate nods. "His communications suggest this will be his final intelligence handover. They're pulling him out." At 11:47 p.m., Traoré walks alone through the presidential compound's gardens. His security detail maintains distance. This is a moment that requires solitude. The weight of leadership has never felt heavier. Marcel's quarters occupy a converted colonial mansion, a irony that now cuts deep. Traoré finds his oldest friend sitting at a laptop, typing what appears to be a routine report. But now Traoré knows better. "Working late?" Traoré asks from the doorway. Marcel looks up, flashing the warm smile that has been his weapon for 3 years. "Ibrahim, you know me, always something to finish. Want some tea? I just made a fresh pot." The casual offer of drugged refreshment is so perfectly delivered that Traoré almost admires the professionalism. Almost. "Actually, I wanted to talk about something important." "Close the laptop, Marcel." Something in Traoré's tone makes Marcel pause. For the first time in 3 years, uncertainty flickers across his features. But he recovers quickly, closing the laptop with practiced ease. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Traoré enters the room, moving to the window that overlooks the compound. "I was thinking about our oath at the academy. Do you remember what we promised each other? Brothers in revolution," Marcel recites. "Brothers in purpose." And yet, Traoré turns to face him. "I've discovered that one of us has been living a lie." The mask slips, just for a second, but Traoré catches it, the calculated assessment, the quick evaluation of exits and options. Marcel is deciding whether to maintain his cover or abandon it. "Ibrahim, I don't understand what you're suggesting." Traoré places a photograph on the table between them. It shows Marcel entering the French embassy in Ouagadougou through a service entrance. The timestamp reads 2 weeks ago. DGSE recruitment 3 years ago in Paris. Monthly payments through shell companies. Intelligence reports filed weekly. Chemical sedation of your best friend to make him more compliant during strategic meetings. Marcel's composure finally cracks. He doesn't deny it, there's no point. Instead, he does something worse, he tries to justify it. "You don't understand the bigger picture, Ibrahim. France isn't your enemy, chaos is. Russian influence, Chinese debt traps, American military intervention. At least with France, there's stability, there's order." "Order." Traoré's voice is deadly quiet. "Is that what you call decades of resource extraction that left my father dying in a mine shaft? Is that your definition of stability? Your father's death was tragic, but it wasn't malicious. It was industrial accident in an industry that employs thousands of Burkinabe. Would you rather those jobs go to Ghana? To Mali?" The casual dismissal of his father's death, the reduction of human tragedy to economic calculation, confirms everything Traoré has suspected about the colonial mindset. Even Marcel, who had seemed to reject his French heritage, carries this poison in his blood. "You used my father's death to manipulate me," Traoré says. "You were there when I cried. You held me when the nightmares came. You helped me plan the memorial service. And all of it was intelligence gathering." Marcel stands, perhaps sensing that his cover is completely blown. "I genuinely cared about your pain, Ibrahim. That wasn't performance. But I also had a job to do. A job that included drugging my coffee, light sedatives, nothing harmful, just to create optimal conditions for important conversations." The clinical way Marcel describes chemical manipulation of his closest friend reveals the depth of his psychological conditioning. He has been trained to see human relationships as intelligence assets, emotional bonds as operational opportunities. How many times? Traore asks, how many of my strategic decisions were influenced by your chemicals and psychological manipulation? Marcel considers lying, then appears to decide on partial honesty. Most of them. The gold mine nationalization was delayed by 6 months because of my interventions. The Chinese infrastructure deal was nearly cancelled because I convinced you to demand terms Beijing couldn't accept. The expulsion of French military bases was scheduled for last year, but I created bureaucratic delays. Each admission is a knife twist. Traore realizes that his presidency, his entire political career, has been shaped by foreign intelligence operations. His revolutionary ideals have been systematically undermined by the person he trusted most. Why? The question comes out as a whisper. Why betray everything we believed in? Marcel moves to a cabinet and pours himself a glass of cognac, French cognac. Traore notes bitterly. Because revolution is a young man's dream, Ibrahim. Reality is compromise. France offered me a future beyond this. He gestures around the room. Beyond Africa's limitations. Africa's limitations. The phrase hits Traore like a physical blow. This is what you really think of us, of me, of everything we worked for. I think Africa has potential, but it needs guidance. French partnership, even if it's unequal, is better than Chinese colonialism or American indifference. I was trying to save you from making mistakes that would destroy your country. The paternalism is breathtaking. Marcel genuinely believes he has been protecting Burkina Faso by sabotaging its independence efforts. The colonial mindset runs so deep that even betrayal can be reframed as benevolence. Traore activates a recording device. I want you to understand something, Marcel. This conversation is being documented, not for French intelligence or American interests or Chinese investment opportunities. For history, for the truth. Marcel's eyes narrow. He realizes that this moment will define how their story is remembered. You want the truth? Marcel sets down his cognac. The truth is that you're an idealistic child playing with forces beyond your comprehension. You think you can simply declare independence from the global economic system? You think China and Russia are offering partnership instead of new forms of colonialism? You're naive, perhaps, but at least I'm not a traitor. Traitor? Marcel laughs bitterly. I've been trying to save your life, Ibrahim. Do you know what happens to African leaders who seriously threaten Western interests? Ask Thomas Sankara. Ask Patrice Lumumba. Ask Muammar Gaddafi. The threat is explicit now. Marcel isn't just admitting to espionage. He's revealing the ultimate purpose of his mission. Are you threatening to kill me, Marcel? I'm explaining reality. French intelligence has been protecting you by managing your decisions. Without that management, other solutions become necessary. Traore processes this carefully. Marcel isn't just a spy, he's been a control mechanism. His role was to ensure that Burkina Faso's independence remains symbolic rather than substantive. When that control fails, more direct interventions follow. So my choice is submission or death. Your choice is wisdom or tragedy. I've bought you 3 years of relative peace by ensuring your policies remained within acceptable parameters. Now you're pushing beyond those boundaries. The Chinese infrastructure deal, the new mining partnerships with Russia, the plans for a regional currency, these cross red lines. Traore moves closer to Marcel, studying the face he thought he knew. Red lines drawn by whom? By people who understand that stability in West Africa requires certain continuities. The euphemisms are revealing. Marcel can't bring himself to say colonial control or resource extraction or economic domination. Instead, he speaks of stability and continuity as if oppression becomes acceptable when described in diplomatic language. I have a proposition for you, Traore says quietly. Marcel looks surprised. You're willing to negotiate? In a way, I want you to contact your handlers. Tell them that you've succeeded in your mission completely. Tell them that I've agreed to cancel the Chinese deal, maintain French mining concessions, and return to the CFA franc system. Hope flickers in Marcel's eyes. You're agreeing to their terms? I'm agreeing to give them exactly what they deserve. Over the next 48 hours, Marcel operates under carefully orchestrated conditions. He believes he has successfully manipulated Traore into compliance and prepares to deliver his final intelligence package to Paris. What he doesn't know is that every communication is monitored, every meeting filmed, every transaction recorded. Intelligence Chief Khanate coordinates the operation with surgical precision. Marcel's laptop is compromised, allowing them to read his reports in real time. His phone calls are intercepted. His handler meetings are surveilled. Most importantly, the false intelligence he's reporting creates a detailed map of French operations across West Africa. Marcel tells Paris that Traoré has been successfully coerced into abandoning his independence agenda. He provides fabricated documents showing Burkina Faso's agreement to new French mining concessions. He reports that the Chinese infrastructure delegation has been quietly disinvited. The French response is immediate and revealing. Communications intercepts show celebration in DGSE headquarters. Military commanders in Côte d'Ivoire receive orders to stand down from alert status. Economic ministers begin planning new extraction agreements. Most damaging of all, Marcel's handler provides him with a list of similar operations across Africa, confident that Burkina Faso's capitulation will serve as a model for other countries. They're completely exposed. Khanate reports to Traoré on the second evening. We now have evidence of French intelligence operations in 14 African countries. Bank records, operational plans, agent identities, everything. But Traoré finds no satisfaction in the intelligence coup. The personal betrayal cuts too deep for a professional victory to heal. What about Marcel? He's scheduled to extract tomorrow night. Private jet to Paris, new identity, comfortable retirement in the French countryside. He thinks he's completed the perfect mission. Traoré stares out his office window at the lights of Ouagadougou. Somewhere in this city, Marcel is packing his belongings, preparing to disappear forever. 3 years of shared struggle, of revolutionary planning, of intimate friendship, all of it will vanish as if it never existed. Sir, Khanate says gently, we need to decide how to proceed. Do we arrest him before he leaves, use him for disinformation, or allow him to extract while monitoring his activities in France? It's a professional question requiring a professional answer. But Traoré finds himself thinking not as a president but as a friend, as someone who genuinely loved Marcel like a brother and must now decide his fate. At 8:30 p.m. the following evening, Marcel arrives at the presidential palace for what he believes is a farewell dinner. He carries a briefcase containing his final intelligence reports and a letter of resignation that will become effective after his extraction. In 12 hours, he will be in Paris, debriefing his handlers on 3 years of successful infiltration. Traoré greets him in the private dining room, a space where they have shared countless meals and conversations. The table is set for two with traditional Burkinabe dishes and, ironically, a bottle of French wine that Marcel brought as a gift. To successful partnerships, Marcel raises his glass, offering a toast that carries multiple meanings. To truth, Traoré replies, a counter-toast that Marcel doesn't fully understand. They eat in relative silence, both men processing the weight of their shared history. Marcel appears relaxed, even nostalgic. He speaks fondly of their early days, of the idealistic plans they made, of the brotherhood they forged. For a few moments, Traoré almost believes that some part of their friendship was genuine. I'll miss this, Marcel says as they finish the main course. Whatever our political differences, you've been a true friend, Ibrahim. The casual erasure of 3 years of systematic betrayal as mere political differences finally breaks Traoré's restraint. Before you leave, Traoré says, standing and walking to a cabinet, I want to give you something, a farewell gift. He returns with a thick folder and places it in front of Marcel. Open it. Marcel's confusion is genuine as he opens the folder. Inside are photographs of him entering the French embassy, transcripts of his communications with DGSE, bank records showing payments from shell companies, and detailed analysis of his intelligence activities. The color drains from Marcel's face as he realizes the magnitude of his exposure. But Traoré isn't finished. That's just the summary, he says, activating a large display screen. This is the complete file. The screen shows a comprehensive timeline of Marcel's espionage activities, cross-referenced with major political decisions and their consequences. Maps display French intelligence networks across West Africa. Financial charts track monetary flows from Paris to agents throughout the region. Most devastating of all, audio recordings play Marcel's own voice discussing optimal manipulation strategies. 3 years, Traoré says quietly. 3 years of perfect performance. You should be proud. You nearly destroyed everything I've worked for. Marcel stares at the evidence, his legal mind perhaps calculating damage control options. How long have you known? 6 weeks for the details, but I've suspected for months. Small inconsistencies, fortunate coincidences that always seem to benefit French interests. What happens now? It's a simple question with complex implications. Marcel isn't just asking about his immediate fate, he's asking whether 3 years of friendship means anything, whether shared history provides any protection against the consequences of betrayal. Traoré considers his options. He could arrest Marcel publicly, using him as evidence of French interference. He could allow the extraction to proceed while using Marcel as an unwitting double agent. He could have him killed quietly, sending a message to other foreign operatives. That depends, Traoré says finally, on what you're willing to do to earn redemption. Marcel looks up from the damning evidence spread before him. What do you mean? You have 12 hours before your extraction. During those 12 hours, you can help us damage the networks you've spent 3 years building. Or you can disappear to France and live with the knowledge that you destroyed a continent's hopes for independence. The proposal is elegant in its moral complexity. Traoré is offering Marcel a chance to undo some of the damage he's caused, but only at enormous personal risk. Betraying his French handlers would make Marcel a target for elimination, while refusing would confirm his commitment to colonial interests over African independence. You want me to burn my own intelligence networks? I want you to choose which side of history you want to be on. You've spent 3 years working for the oppressor. Spend 12 hours working for the oppressed. Marcel stands and walks to the window, staring out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, a private jet is being prepared for his extraction. French handlers are counting down hours until their most successful African operation reaches its conclusion. His comfortable retirement in France depends on maintaining operational security for just a few more hours. What specifically are you asking me to do? Traoré joins him at the window. Call your handler. Tell them that you've discovered Burkina Faso is planning to expose French intelligence operations across Africa. Warn them that other countries are involved: Mali, Niger, Guinea. Create panic that will force them to evacuate assets prematurely. That would burn every French agent in West Africa. Yes, including me, especially you. Marcel processes the implications. Betraying his handlers would make him a marked man, unable to return to France and unwelcome in Africa. He would exist in permanent exile, protected only by whatever mercy Traoré might extend. Why offer me this choice? You could simply have me arrested. Traoré considers the question carefully. Because I still remember the young man who swore an oath under African stars. Somewhere inside you, that person might still exist. This is his chance to prove it. The appeal to their shared history is deliberate and painful. Marcel closes his eyes, perhaps remembering that moment 15 years ago when 2 idealistic cadets believed they could change the world together. If I do this, what guarantee do I have that you won't just kill me afterward? None. You'll have to trust me the same way I trusted you for 3 years. The parallel is devastating. Marcel is being asked to place himself at Traoré's mercy with the same faith that Traoré once placed in him. The irony isn't lost on either man. And if I refuse, then you walk out of here tonight, board your extraction flight, and live comfortably in France while Africa burns. But you'll know that you had one chance to choose justice over comfort, and you chose comfort. Marcel returns to the table, staring down at the evidence of his betrayal. The photographs show him entering and leaving the French embassy dozens of times. The financial records track every payment, every bonus, every reward for successful manipulation. The audio recordings capture his voice discussing optimal psychological pressure techniques. I never wanted to hurt you personally, Ibrahim. I hope you understand that. I understand that you compartmentalized your conscience to make betrayal bearable. But understanding doesn't equal forgiveness. Marcel picks up his phone, scrolling through contacts until he finds his handler's number. His finger hovers over the call button for nearly a minute. If I make this call, there's no going back. There's already no going back. The only question is which direction you go forward. At 11:43 p.m., Marcel makes the call that will destroy 3 years of careful intelligence work. His handler, operating from DGSE headquarters in Paris, answers immediately. Libreville. This is Cotonou. Marcel uses his operational code name. We have a catastrophic security breach. The conversation that follows is brief but devastating. Marcel reports that Burkina Faso has discovered French intelligence operations across West Africa and is preparing to expose them internationally. He warns that similar operations in Mali, Niger, and Guinea have been compromised. Most damaging of all, he claims that agent lists and operational plans have been captured. His handler's response is immediate panic. What is your current security status? Blown. I need immediate extraction. but even that may be compromised. Understood. Emergency protocols are now active. All West African assets should consider themselves exposed and act accordingly. The call ends, and Marcel places his phone on the table. It's done. Traoré activates his own phone, connecting to Intelligence Chief Khanate. The package is delivered. Monitor all French diplomatic communications for the next 24 hours. Within minutes, panic begins rippling through French intelligence networks across West Africa. Emergency communications flood diplomatic channels as handlers attempt to contact assets. Extraction protocols activate for agents who believed they were operating in perfect security. Embassy staff in multiple countries begin emergency document destruction procedures. They're evacuating everyone, Khanate reports via secure link. Agents in 5 countries are heading for extraction points. We're getting unprecedented intelligence on their entire network structure. But Traoré finds little satisfaction in the intelligence victory. He studies Marcel's face, searching for signs of genuine remorse or continued calculation. "How do you feel?" he asks. Marcel considers the question seriously. "Like I've just committed suicide, or like you've just been reborn. Perhaps both." They sit in silence for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what has just occurred. Marcel has destroyed his own life's work and made himself a target for assassination. Traoré has gained an intelligence victory but lost his closest friend forever. "What happens to me now?" Marcel asks. "That depends on what you do with whatever time you have left. French intelligence will want you dead for burning their networks. African governments will want you tried for espionage. Your best option is to disappear completely and hope everyone forgets you exist. Or I could stay and help repair the damage I've caused." The suggestion surprises both men. Marcel staying in Africa would be incredibly dangerous, but it would also represent a complete rejection of his French identity and colonial mindset. "You would never be safe here. Every intelligence service would view you as either an asset to be recruited or a threat to be eliminated. Safety is overrated. Besides, I owe a debt that comfortable exile can't repay." Traoré studies his former friend's face, searching for signs of manipulation or calculation. But Marcel's expression carries a weariness that seems genuine, a recognition of the magnitude of his betrayal and the limited options for redemption. "If you stay, you work under complete surveillance. Every conversation monitored, every movement tracked, every decision scrutinized. You would live as a prisoner with the illusion of freedom." That seems appropriate. 6 months later, Ibrahim Traoré stands in his office reviewing intelligence reports from across West Africa. The forced evacuation of French intelligence assets has created opportunities for other African countries to assert greater independence. Mali has announced new mining partnerships with Russia. Niger has expelled French military advisors. Guinea has begun discussions about leaving the CFA franc system. Marcel Dubois works in a small office in the presidential compound, analyzing French diplomatic communications and preparing detailed reports on colonial influence networks. He lives under constant security supervision and has no contact with anyone outside official channels. His comfortable future in France has been replaced by monastic isolation in Africa. The French are attempting to rebuild their networks, Marcel reports during their weekly briefing. New agents are being recruited, primarily from diplomatic families with generational ties to colonial administration. How do we counter that? Education. The most effective French agents are Africans who believe colonial partnership is preferable to independence. Change that belief system, and recruitment becomes impossible. It's the kind of insight Marcel could only provide from his unique perspective as both colonizer and colonized, manipulator and victim of manipulation. "Any word from your former handlers?" 3 separate attempts to contact me. They're offering extraction, protection, and significant financial compensation for information about current operations. Are you tempted? Marcel considers the question honestly. Every day, but I've burned those bridges completely. Besides, I'm trying to earn redemption that comfort can't provide. The relationship between the two men remains complex and unresolved. Traoré can never fully trust Marcel, and Marcel can never fully escape the consequences of his betrayal. But they have found a way to work together in service of African independence, however fragile that collaboration might be. There's something else, Marcel says, hesitating slightly. Intelligence suggests that France is planning a more aggressive response to the recent independence movements. Military intervention, economic warfare, perhaps even assassination campaigns. Targeting whom? leaders who pose the greatest threat to continued French influence. You're at the top of that list. The warning carries personal risk for Marcel. By alerting Traoré to French plans, he's making himself an even higher priority target for elimination. But he delivers the information without apparent calculation or expectation of reward. Why tell me this? You could have remained silent and let events unfold, because 3 years ago I swore an oath under African stars. I broke that oath, but perhaps it's not too late to honor it. Traoré nods slowly. The young man who made revolutionary promises 15 years ago is finally keeping them, even if the path to redemption is far more complex than either of them could have imagined. What do you recommend? Acceleration. Whatever plans you have for complete independence, implement them before France can organize effective countermeasures. The window is closing. As Marcel leaves the office, Traoré reflects on the strange turns of fate that have brought them to this point. His closest friend became his greatest enemy, then chose to become something more complex, a collaborator in the difficult work of decolonization. Outside the window, Ouagadougou stretches toward the horizon, a city slowly transforming as Burkina Faso asserts greater control over its destiny. The struggle for independence continues, shaped by betrayal and redemption, by the recognition that revolution requires not just destroying old systems, but building new ones capable of surviving the inevitable counterattacks. The night Marcel revealed his betrayal was the night Ibrahim Traoré truly understood the price of leadership and the complex path to freedom that requires working even with those who have wounded you most deeply.